The courtroom was packed tighter than it had ever been. Every seat was filled, every aisle blocked by reporters clutching notepads, phones, and silent prayers that they were wrong about what they thought they might hear. There were murmurs outside, fans pressing against metal barricades, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man everyone said wouldn't come. But when the door opened and Jay-Z stepped inside, dressed in a dark tailored suit and carrying the weight of 20 years of friendship like a stone in his chest, the entire room shifted. Not with noise, but with silence. Not one camera shutter clicked. Not one reporter blinked. Because even now, seeing him in this context, a federal courtroom, not a studio, not a stage, was a rupture in reality. He walked past the defense table where Diddy sat, his expression frozen, arms folded, eyes forward. Jay didn't look at him. Not yet. He approached the witness stand with a slow precision that betrayed how many thoughts were crashing behind his composed expression. When the prosecutor asked him to state his name for the record, he leaned into the mic, steady. Sean Corey Carter. The sound of that name under oath sent ripples through the gallery. People in the front rows clutched their pens tighter, some jaws fell slack. The judge didn't need to call for silence. The silence had taken over on its own. Mr. Carter, the prosecutor said, her tone clipped but controlled. Do you understand why you've been subpoenaed to testify today? He nodded once. I do. And you understand that your testimony today is under penalty of perjury? I do, he said again, a little softer. Then let's begin, she continued. During your years of association with Mr. Diddy, did you ever witness behaviors or circumstances that could be relevant to this investigation? He paused. A breath, a second breath. Yes, he said finally. And for a long time I chose to stay quiet about it. A wave moved through the gallery. One of the jurors instinctively leaned forward. Diddy blinked once. No other reaction. The prosecutor moved in. Why now? Jay-Z didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because the truth has a weight, and it doesn't go away. I've carried it. We all have. But what's happening in this courtroom, it's bigger than music, bigger than loyalty. The prosecutor nodded slowly. Let's talk about the parties. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them, eyes sharp. There were events that didn't feel like celebrations. They felt orchestrated, controlled, selective. There were people who arrived late, always through the back entrances. Young, male, nervous. Did you ask Mr. Diddy about them? Once, he said, I made a joke about him disappearing with his special guests. He looked at me in a way that made it clear I shouldn't bring it up again, and I didn't. Did it disturb you? Yes, he said bluntly. Then why didn't you speak out? Jay-Z looked down at his hands. Because I didn't want to believe it. Because speaking out meant war. Not just with him, but with a whole machine designed to protect him. I wasn't ready for that war. The courtroom held its breath. Diddy remained statue still, but the energy around him was starting to fray. The prosecutor took a step forward. Let's talk about the night in the Hollywood Hills. Jay nodded, a slight shiver in his jaw. Most guests had left. I stayed behind because we were supposed to discuss something. I was walking down the hallway toward the studio, and one door was slightly open. I wasn't trying to look. I just glanced. Inside, I saw Diddy with a young man. They weren't talking, and it wasn't mutual. A collective gasp swept across the room. The judge didn't interrupt, but his eyes had widened. Did he see you? Yes, Jay-Z said. He looked straight at me, and he didn't stop what he was doing. He just stared, like he was daring me to say something. Did you? No, Jay-Z whispered. I left. I didn't sleep that night. The prosecutor's voice hardened. Did anyone contact you the next day? Yes, Jay said. One of his assistants called. She laughed. Said, hope you enjoyed the after-hour show. You didn't see anything, right? He took another breath. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. The room buzzed again, this time with fear, this time with implication. The prosecutor waited, let the silence settle. Did Mr. Diddy ever use his influence to keep people quiet? All the time, Jay-Z answered. Not with fists, not with direct threats. He didn't need to. His power was in what he knew, what he had. What do you mean? He kept files, digital, paper, video, insurance. You go to one of his parties, have a little too much to drink, let your guard down, and the next day someone from his team calls you. Let's keep last night between us. If you asked questions, sometimes they'd send a clip, just enough to remind you, we see everything. The jurors exchanged glances. One woman in the gallery covered her mouth. Did you ever see any of these clips? Yes, Jay-Z said. Once. He showed me one, casually, like it was a highlight reel. It was a famous actor, drugged, compromised. Diddy just smiled, said it was insurance. Did he ever say what he'd do with it? No, he didn't have to. And people went along with it? They had no choice, Jay-Z said. You speak out, you lose your label, your tour, your sponsors, your reputation. He didn't have to ruin your life, just convince others that you weren't worth trusting. The prosecutor stopped pacing. Have you ever been threatened? Not directly, he said. But I felt it. When I pulled away from him, stopped showing up, canceled deals, rumors started, anonymous calls, industry whispers. People stopped replying. He looked up. I knew what it was. And you still came forward. I had to, he said. I built my legacy on truth, but if I stayed silent, that legacy would be a lie. The room froze. That line didn't echo, it landed. It cut through fame and touched every person in the courtroom. Jay-Z wasn't speaking like a rapper. He wasn't speaking like a mogul. He was speaking like a man who had been complicit and who had finally chosen not to be. The prosecutor stepped back. Jay-Z stayed in place, eyes not on Diddy, not on the judge, but on something only he could see. Maybe memory, maybe regret. But the truth had finally come out, and it wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about the empire built on silence, and the silence had just shattered. The prosecutor allowed the silence to linger for a beat longer, not out of hesitation but out of reverence for the gravity of what had just been said. Then, with a voice that was steadier than before but now carried a trace of weight, she stepped forward again, her heels clicking softly against the courtroom floor. Mr. Carter, she said, you mentioned earlier that Mr. Diddy had surveillance set up in multiple properties. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that? Jay-Z nodded slowly. Every house he owned had some form of recording equipment. Some were obvious security cameras at the front gate, in the hallways, but others were hidden, behind air vents, inside smoke detectors, bathrooms, bedrooms. It wasn't just about safety, it was about control. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. How do you know this for certain? Jay's tone didn't change. Because I saw them being installed. And because I was warned more than once not to say anything stupid when I stayed over. His people would say things like, "This house remembers everything." At first, I thought it was a joke. Then I saw the footage. What kind of footage? Private moments, Jay-Z said. Things people didn't know were being recorded. Guests, celebrities. Sometimes under the influence, sometimes with people they wouldn't want the world to know they were with. And he kept this footage? He did, Jay confirmed. There was a vault, not just metaphorical, a real one, fireproof, biometric, at a property in New Jersey. That's where he kept the worst of it. A gasp fluttered across the room. The stenographer's fingers hesitated for a moment before catching up. The judge looked down, not blinking. The prosecutor took a deep breath. Were you ever asked to deliver or retrieve any of these recordings? Yes, Jay-Z said. Once. He gave me a drive, told me to hand it off to an executive who was backing out of a deal. I knew what it meant. I didn't do it. That's when things started to change between us. Change how? Distance, Jay said. Disapproval. Whispers that I wasn't loyal. And then the stories started. You mean stories about you? Yeah, he said. That I was unstable. That I'd turned my back on my people. That I wasn't to be trusted. It was subtle, but it spread. I knew it was him. That's how he operated. The prosecutor nodded slightly, as if fitting the puzzle pieces together in her mind. You also mentioned that others were silenced. Can you share a specific example? Jay's shoulders shifted just a bit, like something inside him hardened. There was a young songwriter. He was sharp, talented, didn't drink much, didn't party the way others did. He saw something one night, something he shouldn't have. Walked in on Diddy with someone, said it didn't feel right. He told me about it. What happened to him? He vanished, Jay-Z said flatly. Not physically, professionally. Within a week, his credits were scrubbed, his interviews pulled, label contracts voided. Word started spreading that he was unstable. I never saw him again. Do you believe that was intentional? I don't believe, Jay said. I know. The gallery was so still now it felt like the walls themselves were listening. The prosecutor was quiet for a beat. Was he the only one? No, Jay-Z said. There was a female executive. Brilliant. Respected. She started asking questions who came and went from the back entrances, why certain names weren't logged. A week later, she was accused of misconduct. Fired. No investigation. Just gone. The prosecutor took a step closer, her voice lower now. So why didn't anyone else say something? Because Diddy wasn't acting alone, Jay replied. He was protected. By lawyers, by managers, by networks. He made too much money for too many people. People didn't just protect him, they depended on him. And you? She asked. Did you depend on him? Jay-Z didn't flinch. I did, at first, the access, the opportunities. But eventually, I started to see the cost. You had to trade your integrity to stay close. I ignored things I shouldn't have. I justified what I saw. I looked away. Do you regret that? Every day, he said. Not just for what I saw, but for the people I failed by staying quiet. The room was heavy with that answer, the weight of it pressed against everyone's chest. One of the jurors looked like they were blinking back tears. The prosecutor gave a respectful pause before continuing. Mr. Carter, you mentioned earlier that you saw a video that changed everything for you. Can you speak on that now? Jay hesitated not from fear, but from burden. Then he said, "It was just the two of us. At his penthouse in New York. He played a clip for me. Said it was insurance." He looked down. "It was a Grammy-nominated singer, clearly under the influence. Someone was with him. He was vulnerable. He wasn't in control. Diddy just watched me while it played, didn't blink. When it ended, he said, 'Now you understand why nobody crosses me.'" The courtroom was no longer a legal chamber, it was a mausoleum of silence. A witness stand had become a confessional booth for the sins of an empire. The judge looked pale. Diddy sat like a statue, unmoving, but no longer impenetrable. The image that had loomed over the industry for decades was starting to crack, and Jay-Z, with every word, was driving the hammer deeper. The prosecutor, visibly shaken but composed, stepped back. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly. "We'll take a brief recess." But no one moved. No one even breathed. Because no one in that room, not the jury, not the lawyers, not even the bailiff, would ever see the industry, or its icons, the same again. And it was only the beginning. When the court reconvened 15 minutes later, the air hadn't cleared, it had thickened. The tension didn't dissipate in the hallway or dissolve in whispers over plastic cups of coffee. It clung to everyone like humidity in a locked room, and when Jay-Z returned to the witness stand, it wasn't with the air of a celebrity, it was with the steady walk of a man who had decided to finish what he started. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, folded his hands. This time, his eyes met Diddy Combs. For the first time all day, the defendant shifted. Not much, but enough to prove that something inside him had started to fray. The prosecutor remained standing. Her notepad was untouched. She didn't need it anymore. The truth had moved past facts and dates. It was now being spoken from memory, from history, and from the shadows of a system long protected by fame and fear. "Mr. Carter," she began again, "you've described manipulation, surveillance, and coercion, but I need to ask you something direct." Jay-Z waited. "In your years of association with Mr. Diddy were you ever asked to participate in efforts to suppress someone else's story?" Jay-Z didn't hesitate. "Yes. Once, there was an R&B singer, young. Gained attention quickly. She'd been at one of those parties. She claimed she had been drugged. Said she woke up confused, filed a complaint." He paused. "Diddy's team panicked. They called me. Asked me to post something on social media, something harmless. Tag her. Say we were working on music together. The idea was to make it look like she was still connected to us, like there was no issue." The prosecutor tilted her head. "Did you know why at the time?" "Not fully," Jay-Z said, "but I had a gut feeling, and I did it anyway. I regret that more than almost anything I've done." "What happened after that?" "She disappeared," he said quietly. "Not physically, but digitally. Her lawsuit never happened. She stopped performing. Her label dropped her. No one heard from her again." The room felt colder, somehow, as though the fluorescent lights couldn't reach past the shadows now crawling up the walls. "Did you ever try to contact her afterward?" "No," he said. "By the time I realized what I had done, it was already too late. She was gone." The prosecutor looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked, "Do you believe there were others, artists, executives, journalists who knowingly participated in similar efforts to protect Mr. Diddy "Yes," Jay-Z said, his voice unwavering. "I could give you a list." "Why would they help?" "Because the system made them complicit. Some were victims. Some were collaborators. Some were just afraid. "What about the tapes?" she asked. "Did anyone else see them?" "Yes," Jay-Z said. "And once you'd seen them, you couldn't unsee them. That was the point. Diddy never had to say what he'd do with them. He just had to remind you they existed." A few members of the jury were visibly shaken now. One had their hands folded tightly over their lap. Another bit the inside of their cheek until it turned white. The prosecutor exhaled slowly. "Carter, I need to ask you one more thing. A sensitive question." Jay-Z nodded. "Did you ever believe someone was in physical danger around Mr. Diddy Combe?" Jay-Z's posture stiffened. His eyes dimmed a shade. "Yes," he said. "More than once." The courtroom waited in near prayer. "There was an artist, talented, just signed a small distribution deal, came from a town that still believed in dreams. He was green, curious, asked too many questions. Who paid for what? Why meetings happened at night? Why certain guests came in through exits nobody else used. I warned him, gently, but he didn't listen." "What happened?" "He was in a car accident. 2 days after a party in Miami. We'd spoken the night before. He said he felt like someone had been in his hotel room, like he was being watched. He said he thought Diddy was trying to trap him. That was his word. Trap." Jay's voice slowed. "I went to the hospital. He couldn't speak. His jaw was wired shut, but he scribbled something on a notepad and handed it to me." "What did it say?" "Don't trust the driver." The judge blinked, frozen mid-motion. A few gasps escaped the back row. "Did he recover?" the prosecutor asked. "Physically, yes. Professionally, no. His distribution deal was dropped. Shows canceled, media appearances pulled. His name faded out like someone had wiped it from the industry overnight." "Do you believe it was retaliation?" "I don't believe," Jay-Z said again. "I know." "Did you try to protect him?" Jay looked away for the first time. "As much as I could, but Diddy owned every room we walked into, every phone call, every headline. Even when you thought you were acting alone, you weren't." The prosecutor stepped forward again. "Were there others, public figures, who tried and failed to speak up?" Jay-Z nodded. "There was an actor, respected, known for standing up for others. He told me once privately that he believed Diddy had something on him, footage from a night he couldn't remember. He didn't say what it was, just that he couldn't fight back without risking everything. A month later, he left the country, came back, never spoke about it again." The gallery had stopped reacting. There were no more gasps, no more pen drops, just stillness, just listening. "Why do you believe this went on for so long?" the prosecutor asked. Jay's response was immediate. "Because he made people feel powerful before he made them feel afraid. He gave them the illusion of freedom, of success, and once they were in too deep, he took everything else, their leverage, their secrets, their silence." He glanced toward the jury. "People like Diddy don't survive in the dark. They build palaces of illusion, and as long as the lights stay on, nobody questions what's happening in the basement." The prosecutor stood still. The silence that followed was dense, thick enough to slice with a blade. Even the judge had no words. Even Diddy Combe, for the first time all day, looked smaller than the suit he was wearing. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said softly, but it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot, because Jay-Z was far from finished, and the world, watching outside holding its breath, was about to hear truths that would change everything. The prosecutor did not retreat to her table. She remained in the center of the courtroom as if anchored by something larger than herself. Her voice, when it returned, was quieter but laced with steel. "Mr. Carter, I'm going to ask you now about something that has been whispered about for years. Something that many people in this room may have heard in rumor, but never in testimony." Jay-Z didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. Did Sean Diddy Combs have secret relationships with male individuals? The question slammed into the room like a wave hitting stone. Gasps rose again, not in shock at the topic, but because someone had finally said it out loud, in a courtroom, under oath, without flinching. Jay-Z's voice came slow, deliberate. "Yes." Silence swallowed every corner of the room. The judge didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The air was too thick with reckoning. The prosecutor's tone stayed level. "Were these relationships consensual?" Jay-Z's jaw tensed. "Not always," he said. "That's why this is hard to talk about. Some were consensual, but others were not. Some were manipulated. Some were coerced. Some were too intoxicated or intimidated to even understand what was happening. And some were afraid to say no." The courtroom shifted again, as if the floor had tilted beneath the feet of every person seated. "Tell us what you saw," the prosecutor said. Jay-Z didn't look away. There were nights after parties, not the big public ones, the private ones, the ones where people were vetted and handpicked, where young men showed up through side doors, some from the industry, some not. But the pattern was always the same. They stayed for a short time, left quietly, often disoriented. Some never returned. Others left with eyes that didn't match the ones they came in with. His voice dropped to a whisper. "One night, a young man, I don't think he was older than 20, was brought in during a late session. Diddy introduced him as new talent. The guy didn't speak much, seemed uncomfortable. Hours passed, everyone else left. Diddy told me to head out too, but I waited outside. Something felt wrong. When the guy came out, he was limping. His shirt was half untucked. He didn't look at me. I offered him a ride. He refused. Got into a cab and disappeared. I never saw him again." The jurors couldn't hide their horror. One had tears in her eyes. Another sat stiffly, knuckles white. "Did you follow up?" the prosecutor asked. "I tried," Jay-Z said. "Reached out through a mutual contact. They said he'd gone home, left the industry, told his family it wasn't for him, but I knew something had happened, something that broke him." The prosecutor stood still, almost afraid to ask the next question. "Did you ever confront Diddy Combs about any of these encounters?" Jay-Z's voice was cold. "Yes, once. I asked him why he blurred the lines, why everything had to be so hidden, so controlled." He laughed. "Told me, everyone wants something. I just give it to them before they ask. That way they owe me." He didn't see it as wrong. He saw it as strategy. The courtroom pulsed with a new kind of silence, one born not from disbelief, but from the confirmation of everything people had suspected but couldn't prove. "So you're saying," the prosecutor said, stepping forward slowly, "that some of these encounters, these relationships, were predatory?" "Yes," Jay-Z said. "Some were criminal." The gallery recoiled in a collective breath. One of the defense attorneys dropped his pen. The judge leaned forward, face drawn. "Why are you speaking now?" the prosecutor asked. Jay-Z met her eyes. "Because I helped protect a man who used intimacy as a weapon. because the stories I heard behind closed doors are now being lived out in real pain by people who were too broken to fight back. Because if I say nothing, I become just another brick in the wall that kept them silent. The room was trembling, not from sound but from the weight of truth. A woman in the back row, her face hidden beneath a baseball cap, hands trembling, stood up. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking. "Thank you for not letting him win." Jay-Z didn't respond with words. He just looked at her. And in that look, there was recognition not of status, not of celebrity, but of pain, and finally, of visibility. When he stepped down from the witness stand, the room remained frozen. He walked, not as a legend, but as a man who had made a choice to tell the truth when the world had taught him silence. And with every step, a system cracked beneath him. Not just Diddy Combs, not just the empire of one man, but an entire culture built on looking the other way. And that culture was crumbling now, brick by brick, word by word, truth by devastating truth. When Jay-Z returned to his seat beside the U.S. Marshal assigned to his protection, the courtroom still hadn't moved. The bailiff looked to the judge as if awaiting permission to breathe. The judge, stone-faced but clearly shaken, gave a curt nod. The prosecutor didn't sit. She turned back toward the bench, but her gaze swept the gallery first. It was no longer just a room full of jurors and press, it had become a reckoning chamber. She stepped forward once more, slower this time, her notes forgotten, her voice tinged with a rawness that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you've testified to years of manipulation, coercion, and systemic cover-ups, but I need to ask about one final thread. A name, a file, a piece of evidence that suggests just how far-reaching Mr. Diddy Combs' influence really was." Jay-Z blinked slowly. He had known this moment was coming. The weight in his chest hadn't lifted since the moment he took the oath. It only grew heavier. "There's a list," he said. "A digital file kept by one of his assistants. Password protected. Updated regularly. Names, dates, footage codes, keyword tags. Not just artists. Politicians, athletes, executives. People he thought he could use one day if he needed to." The courtroom cracked. It wasn't loud, it was deeper. The kind of shift that lives in the back of your throat when everything you trusted turns to smoke. Reporters dropped their pens in unison. One juror choked on her breath. A low collective whisper rose from the back like a wave but died under the judge's gavel. "Order," he said sharply, but even he didn't raise his voice like he used to. Jay-Z sat still, resolute. "He called it leverage," he continued. "Not blackmail, just leverage. But it was blackmail. Quiet, cold, collected." The prosecutor didn't even blink. "Have you seen it?" "Partially," Jay said. "Names I recognized, codes next to them, like March 22nd, DJM House, File 7B. Some had active written next to them, others said archived." "And this file?" she asked. "Do you believe it still exists?" Jay-Z looked her in the eye. "I believe it exists in multiple forms. I believe it's backed up, encrypted, and I believe that's what keeps a lot of powerful people quiet." The judge leaned forward now, not out of skepticism, but because what was unfolding in front of him had officially outgrown the confines of one trial. This was no longer just about Diddy Comb. It was a black mirror turned toward an entire ecosystem. The prosecutor took a moment. Her shoulders didn't fall, but her hands gripped the podium tighter than before. "And you chose today, this courtroom, This trial to reveal it? Jay-Z nodded. Because for too long I helped maintain a myth. I showed up to the parties, I stood on the red carpets, I posted the pictures. I let the illusion live because the truth felt too dangerous. But then I started seeing the people who disappeared. The artists who broke. The assistants who got fired for asking the wrong questions. And I realized I wasn't just standing by. I was standing on top of the same bones they were buried under. The room was silent again, not in shock anymore, but in mourning. Mourning the innocence they thought the industry had. Mourning every cover story that was actually a smokescreen. Mourning every artist who never got to speak. The prosecutor exhaled. Mr. Carter, is there anything else the court should know? Jay-Z closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. There was a room, he said, in a house Diddy owned near Malibu. Soundproof. No windows. Just a couch, a speaker system, and a mounted camera. He joked once that it was his truth room. Said, "You leave everything behind when you go in there." The judge looked visibly unsettled. Do you believe that room was used for illegal activities? I know it was, Jay-Z said, because one time I went looking for him during a session. I saw a man come out. He was crying, couldn't even look me in the eye. He left without saying a word. The prosecutor's voice cracked for the first time. And what did you do? I did nothing, he said. I told myself it was none of my business, that maybe it was personal, that maybe I'd misunderstood. But the truth is I didn't want to know, because once you know, you can't unknow. Once you say something, you become a target, and I wasn't ready for that. But I am now. That line didn't just hit, it landed like a verdict. One, the courtroom had been circling around all day but hadn't spoken aloud. Jay-Z hadn't come to destroy Diddy Comb with revenge. He had come to bury the lie they had all protected. The prosecutor stepped back. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge looked at the defense table. Diddy Comb sat motionless, but sweat had begun to pool beneath his collar. His hands were clasped, but his jaw had tensed so hard it pulsed beneath his cheekbone. The illusion had cracked, and the monster behind it had been named not just by one man, but by the silence of a room that no longer consented to protect him. Jay-Z stood up as the judge called for a recess. He didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. Only the quiet stillness of a world that had finally been forced to look at itself. The doors opened. Reporters surged. Cameras flashed. Social media ignited. But Jay-Z didn't see any of it. He just kept walking. Straight through the fire he used to stand beside, straight into the light he used to avoid. And behind him, the empire began to fall.